So we'll call the meeting to
Recording
order.
in progress.
And thank everyone for coming to the Federal Way Land Use and Transportation meeting. I'm going to excuse Councilmember Walsh. He will not be here tonight. And as you see, we have Lydia here, Council President Linda Kochmar, myself, Hung Tran, my committee member, and Councilmember Honda. So thank you all for coming. And the first part of our agenda will be public comment. Is there any public comment out there? Seeing none, we're going to move right on to committee business. And is there any committee business anybody like to bring up? No? Okay. So now we'll go to item A, approval of the minutes for February 5th, 2024.
Chair Dovey, I move approval of the minutes September 5th, 2024 as is submitted.
And I will second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, now on item B is South 288th Street Road, Phase 2, 85% design report and bid authorization. Mr. Strong, you're up.
All right. So, it's not going, there we go. Phase 1 for the road diet, we're finished up construction in a couple weeks. We're hoping to get the second one going this summer. It's a little bit larger, as you can see from our map. For our budget, we're looking at 3.268 million for Phase 2. Our estimated expenditures right now is about 3.8 million, so a little under. So we're looking to go out to bid and see what we get. Hopefully we get under bid, or bids that are less than that. We also have the Phase 1 contingency that we are hopefully going to rely on. We'll know if we'll have that within about a couple months once Phase 1's all wrapped up. So our options to consider is authorize staff to complete the design and bid the 288th Road Diet Phase 2. Return to LUC and council for bid award, further reports and authorization, or do not authorize to do this. The mayor recommends option 1. Any questions?
Council, is there any questions on this? Yes, Councilor Honda?
Oh, thank
Ready to
you.
push your button? There you go.
I'm looking at the numbers, so you're hoping that you have the contingency fund from Phase 1 to move into Phase 2 for the funding?
Yeah. So that would be 91,000 for the contingency, which will put a small dent in it. But as of now, we need to just go out to bid and see what contractors are going to give us for their.
So if the costs come in over what you have, what would be the plan of action?
We'd have to reassess and see if there's anything that we can cut. As of now, it's hard to say what we can cut from the project since it's pretty tight. You know, the overlay kind of needs to happen on 288. It's really bad shape. And of course, we can't cut the actual striping since that's the entire purpose of the road diet. So,
And Phase 2 is that overlay?
yeah. And the road's in worse condition from Military to Pack Highway. So it's more of a severe overlay as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll just have a follow-up question. So if we go out to bid and we don't have the available funds to do this, I mean, you said we'd have to rethink it. Are there any suggestions what we're rethinking?
So there's as Jonathan alluded to, there's a couple of options here. One would be there is a little bit of unallocated money in the capital program right now from some of the other projects that have come in under budget recently. So the project budget that you're seeing on the top half of the screen is what's in the approved city budget currently. So ultimately right now, this work, we have been seeing the pricing come down a little bit as we've seen these projects go out to bid recently. So obviously the hope is that this comes in within the approved city budget. But if not, yeah, I mean, we would have to come back to council with a conversation of do we cut elements, as Jonathan mentioned, or do we transfer money from one of the projects that came in under budget into this budget? Right now, we're not asking council to award this or to change the budget since we don't really know what we'd be changing it to. So the goal is just to get actual numbers from from contractors and then be able to have a little bit more of an informed decision about what the best approach to take going forward is.
Thank you. Any other, yes, Councilor Colchmar?
So, a lot of the bids that the state is working on right now, for example, the 520 Floating Bridge lid project came in billions over the amount. So I'm just wondering, would we be able to hold off on the bidding if it was way over?
If it was way over, then yeah, we have to reassess once we see what these bids are looking like. If they're coming over our estimate, then we're probably definitely gonna have to cut something. If it's coming under, maybe we can reallocate funds from a different project that came under bid.
So I'm wondering, if you have to cut, because a lot of this is, road striping for, the diet means reducing the road, right?
We're reducing the laneage.
The
So
lanes,
it's going
yeah.
from 2 lanes and going both ways to going 1 with each way and then a turn lane in the center.
So what would seem to me to be appropriate would be to just simply do the road overlay if you had to, and then wait for the lane shrinkage later.
Yeah, this project ties in with our first phase of the with the road diet, and that is, that was the primary focus of this project, was to convert to the road diet. So I don't see a way we would cut that from the project.
So
Could
then
just-
you're thinking maybe you just hold off on the whole project?
There's a couple items that maybe can be cut that have already designed for. We don't want to cut them because we already paid people to design it, but like a push button here or some signalization here. But really, we just got to go out there and see what we're getting for prices so we can reassess after.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. Knowing that we're having potential concerns budget-wise with this project, are there other road projects coming up this summer that we may be facing the same thing?
Yeah, so we have a long list of projects that are in the process of going out to bid. So
Okay.
it is possible. This is the project that has a delta between what's in the approved budget today and the engineer's estimate. I guess to answer your question directly, this is the only one that's shown as overage.
Okay.
But, that being said, there's a lot of projects going out to bid. So I certainly hear the council president's comment about the mega projects. They've been getting a lot of attention in the press, and with WashDOT. I think we've been seeing these smaller projects more in line with this have been coming in a little under budget. For the contractors that can't really bite off those huge projects, there is a little bit less work in the area, so that is helping us. But ultimately, once we have actual numbers from a low bid contractor, then we can have a little bit more of an informed decision of if we should be basically one of 3 pathways. 1, allocating more money. 2, negotiating with the contractor to cut a specific element, or 3, rejecting the bids and kind of revamping and going back out. But I think we're at the point now where there's so much volatility in the market, pricing construction is getting more and more challenging and less accurate. So I think the recommendation is to get some real numbers. That way we can have a little bit more of an informed conversation about what the best approach going forward is.
Okay.
And one last question. If we didn't have a TIB grant for this, would this even be on our, for discussion?
I'm going to ask Rick to chime in on this one a little bit. I think the answer is yes. This is a known safety corridor project that we've had a project on here to do something about safety throughout here for a long time.
Yes, that is correct. We've had, over the past 10 years, we've had 3 fatalities in that corridor. And so the road diet is an attempt to address those by providing safer pedestrian crossings with the RFBs and the pedestrian refuge islands in the place of a 2-way left turn lane. So that, and it also involves replacing the traffic signal at Military and 288th, which is the oldest signal we have in the city right now. All the conduits are stuffed. If somebody ran into one of those signal poles, the interim solution would be to put up a temporary span wire signal, and that will take a few days. So That one's probably the most critical traffic signal up for replacement right now.
Thank you. Any other comments, or do we have a motion?
Okay, with that, I move to forward option 1 to March 19, 2024 City Council consent agenda for approval.
And I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move to item C, approval of this, to submit NPDES annual report.
Good evening, council members. My name is Kevin Dew, the Water Quality Program Supervisor for Public Works. I'm here to talk about our MPDS stormwater permit and submittal of our annual report. And so the question is, should the council authorize the Public Works Director to submit our annual report to Ecology as required by our MPDS permit? And so our permit is broken into 9 sections, and in our stormwater management plan update, which is in the packet, it goes over how we fulfill each of these sections and how we plan to fulfill it for 2024. And so in the next couple slides, I'll just briefly go over each section, just for a general overview of what the permit's asking from us. So we have stormwater planning, which is basically implementing stormwater planning programs to inform and assist the development policies for cleaner receiving waters. So one of that is like low impact development, like pervious pavement. It's making sure we make our plans, such as a stormwater management plan update, is required through this section of the permit, our swim comp plan, and so is our West Hylabos Stormwater Management Action Plan. Section 2 is public education and outreach. Purpose is to build general awareness, effective behavior change to eliminate behaviors that cause adverse stormwater effects. Some examples of this is the Storming the Sound with Salmon program we partner with Federal Way Public Schools, tabling at public events such as Farmers Market, Kids Day, Hooked on Fishing, providing volunteer opportunities such as curb marking, litter pickup, stream team, and then also our spill kit outreach program where we reach out to businesses, provide free education about spill preparedness, and provide a free spill kit to them. Section 3, public involvement and participation. Purpose is to make sure the public's involved in our decision-making and planning. And so we do this by publishing our plans and reporting on our website, and we perpetually, year-round, allow them to comment on it. And also during these meetings where we present to council, the public can also comment. Section 4 is MS4 mapping and documentation. We're required to know where our structures are and what system connects to us. And so we maintain this through our GIS database maintained by our asset coordinator and our IT department. Then we also have Section 5, illicit discharge detection and elimination, also known as IDE. Through this program is more responsive where if something went into our system, illicit connection, or a spill that went to our system, we have a program and policies and procedures on how to respond to that. And basically, if we find a responsible party, they'll have to clean it. But if not, we have to maintain our structures. Controlling runoff from construction sites, making sure we have a program for that, and we do through our construction inspection program, making sure erosion and sediment control measures are up to par with the King County Stormwater Design Manual, and so nothing goes in our system. Section 7 is operations and maintenance, make sure we maintain our public structures, and we also make sure that commercial sites maintain their structures because they connect to us, and if it goes into our system, it's our problem. And so we maintain over 22,000 structures, 480 miles of pipe and ditches, and through our commercial site inspections, we make sure the commercial site maintain their structures as well. And then number 8, source control program, which is in contrast to IDE, this is more preventative, where we go out to businesses with high potential pollution, educate them to prevent pollution to our storm system, and implement BMPs to prevent anything that could potentially go into our system. And then Section 9 is monitoring and assessment. We simply fulfill this by paying into a regional fund, as most, if not all, jurisdictions do, instead of implementing our own monitoring program. And so the options considered today is, should we approve submittal of the annual report, or should we not? The mayor recommends option 1. Any questions?
Any question? Oh, yes, Council.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. So with the 2024 annual report questions, there are a lot of numbers that are skipped. Is it because we've accomplished or met those?
Yeah, yeah, ecology takes out those questions when they feel like they don't need to ask them again, but they don't renumber the rest of the questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, I have a question in regard to public education and outreach. Do we have those in multiple languages or just English?
Yes,
We
we
do.
do. And we offer it, translations on, like, we can call language line for them if they wish to call in. We don't have the language readily available. We can also provide through that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed approval and submittal of the 2024 annual report and stormwater management program plan update to the March 19, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to the authorization to enter into an interlocal agreement with King County for use of the regional stormwater decant facility.
Good evening, council. My name is Jared Larson. Oh, did I exit out of? We'll put a quick pause on this.
Oh wait, there's somewhere this is saved though. Do you remember where the links are saved?
Okay, here comes the guy from behind the curtain.
Thank you. Okay, good evening, council. That's why they keep me out in the field. My name's Jared Larson. I'm the operations manager for the Public Works Department. I'm here today to present authorization to enter into the interlocal agreement with King County for use of their regional stormwater decant facility. Policy question, should the council authorize Public Works to enter into an interlocal agreement with King County for use of the regional decant facility? A little bit of background. In 2021, Surface Water Maintenance entered into this limited term use agreement with King County, which expired at the end of last year. The new agreement spans from 2024 to 2025 till December 31st of 2025. It will allow us to continue to use their decant facility. And decant facilities allow for proper disposal of waste solids and liquids that are collected from stormwater systems. Financial impacts, the approved 2023-2024 budget for SWIM 401 includes $15,500 for waste disposal billing, and no impact to the SWIM 401 or general fund is anticipated. Options considered, authorize Public Works to enter into the interlocal agreement with King County for use of the regional decant facility. Option 2, do not authorize and provide direction to staff. And Mayor recommends option 1. Are there any questions?
Council, are there any questions? Council President?
Thank you. Well, nice to see you inside rather than outside.
Thank you.
So I'm trying to visualize what the decamp facility is. I mean, I can see that they're dumping into the stormwater drain,
Yes.
but is there something that King County has that
So,
treats?
yes, King County's regional decamp facility is located at the Renton facility up on the East Hill. And so this here is a picture of a vector tuck, which is removing or educting liquids and solids from the stormwater system. Once this is collected, it goes into the tank at the back of the truck. And the decamp facility looks very much like a transfer station, where there's large bins where they back the trucks into, where they will decant, get rid of the liquid, and then they will move the truck and then dump the solids.
And that's in Renton.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Lydia? Oh, no question? Okay. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to forward the interlocal agreement to the March 19, 2024 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. Now we get to go to ordinance for the TC3 development agreement. Mr. Nivens. This must be a real important one. He's got his tea there ready to go, and
Don't want to have a dry mouth moment.
yeah.
Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Committee Member Tran, Council President Kochmar, and Council Members Keith Niven. Almost there. There we go. This evening, we're bringing forward, after about a year of negotiation, a proposed development agreement for the city and Trent Development for TC3 properties. I would like to say everybody got everything they wanted in this development agreement, but that's not how development agreements work. I think both the city and Trent would say that this agreement benefits both parties and is a win-win as we look to move forward with developing in our downtown. So the policy question in front of the City Council is, should the city enter into a development agreement with Trent Development for the acquisition and development of the city-owned TC3 properties? So we've talked about this a number of times, and so I'm going to hit on a few of the details, and then obviously answer any questions you may have. So the way that we are moving forward is the area that's kind of circumscribed by the red dashed line is the property that Trent will buy from the city. And notably, what's left out of that is the PAC. At the southwest corner, the grand staircase, kind of at the central south end, and then the area that we envision being the Civic Plaza in the middle of this property, which is why they're not buying that. But the rest of this property will be under Trent ownership under the terms of the development agreement. They have envisioned 4 phases, and this is a diagram from the development agreement, which is both a phasing and a timing diagram. And basically, you can see certain dates associated to each of the phases. And what those are basically outside dates where they need to get started, or else the city can potentially buy the property back. And part of the reason why we put that in the development agreement is we don't want to sell the property to Trent and have them sit on it for the next 20 years. That's not what we want. We want them to actually build. So there's provisions, we call them clawback provisions, where the city can claw the property back if they're not moving forward under a certain time and regimen. Now, these are very generous to Trent because what we don't know is how long it's going to take to lease up that first building. You know, when they build that first building, which will likely be in the southeast corner, but it could also be in that north central block, the one that's labeled Phase 2, the way that the development agreement reads is they could actually start with either of those. And so, you know, they won't start on the second phase until they have a positive response to leasing up whatever happens to be in first phase. So the agreement highlights, there's really 3 questions we need to ask ourselves. 1, will the city receive fair value for the property? 2, is there public benefit provided by entering into this agreement? And number 3, are the proposed deviations from code acceptable? And I'll kind of summarize all 3 of those here for you this evening. So the first thing, property value. The value of the property was set by a CBRE appraisal commissioned by the city. They basically did an evaluation and came up with a value of $12.8 to $13.8 for the property. What Trent is offering the city is to pay us $10 million cash, plus another $2.9 million of public benefits that are listed on this list below the $10 million. And in total, comes out to be $12.9, which falls within that bracketed range of the CBRE appraisal. Public benefit, the first item is significant private investment in our downtown. This will be the first major private investment in our downtown area, and we hope will catalyze other property owners to likewise start to redevelop. Job creation, there will be temporary job creation with the construction jobs that will happen for this project as it moves forward. You know, as you think about that in 4 phases, each phase taking about 1.5 to 2 years to construct, you know, that's 8 years of contractor labor that will be just tied up with this property. There's also ground floor retail space that will be located in each of the buildings, and those jobs will be added to this site, which currently there are none other than what's in the pack, because the target obviously had no jobs. There are residential ownership opportunities. As the council remembers, part of the proposal from Trent was to wrap those buildings with some ground level townhouses around the perimeter. And I believe there's 32 or 38, can't remember, there's a 30-something, actual residential ownership opportunities that will come online with each of those buildings as they move forward. They've also agreed to city-sponsored interim uses on the property, and you might say, what is that? And I'm going to say, I don't know. That's something that Tanya has been working with Trent on, and part of the idea is to, rather than leaving all that property just vacant for the next however many years, to potentially bring in some pop-ups, whether they be tents or actual structures that could be places for some temporary businesses to do business and bring some of the public into that area that wouldn't otherwise happen. And then the last item on this slide is opportunity for civic buildings, both at City Hall, community space, and parking are opportunities that we can take advantage of if we so deem we want to. There's a timeline in the development agreement, the 1st of January of 2028. We have to make a decision, yes or no, on those spaces. There's a lot of conversation we need to have between now and 2028 about all of that. Code deviations. So Road A is kind of the U-shaped road at the north end of the property. It does not meet any current city standards. Trent is wanting it to be what's called a VUNERF, or a shared surface roadway, where potentially the road and the walkways are maybe at the same level, no curbing, separated with bollards or other separators. It will likely be stamped concrete, not asphalt pavement, and they're looking at it as being kind of a signature street through the block, but it also comes with an escalation of cost, and so that's why it's kind of listed here as a deviation, but was also listed as potentially a public benefit. The inclusionary requirement, so this is the city's affordable housing requirement. As we've talked previously, because we anticipate that there's going to be a significant number of affordable units located on the Sound Transit property, what we've talked about is potentially trading this requirement for something else on the property. And the development agreement lists a number of options which we would be willing to agree to, including subsidized rent for the retail space to make sure that those spaces get filled up with local businesses. That's one of the goals that we have. But basically, that is a code deviation. Ground floor housing, we're allowing that to take the space of some of the ground floor retail requirement in our code. And part of it is, again, thinking about like the 23rd Avenue side of the project, it's really on the outside. You know, if you were to put some retail on that side, it's probably not going to do really well. And so I think we thought overall it would be good to allow for the housing to kind of take the place of some of that ground floor retail. Open space, what they've asked for is would we allow counting some of Road A? If Road A is, and if you imagine like two travel lanes with some really wide sidewalks where there are benches and other kind of pedestrian amenities, they've asked if they can include some of that towards the counting of the open space, and we said that seems like that's fair. And then the last item in terms of kind of code deviations is they've asked for their buildings to exceed the 250-foot length limit that we have in code. I don't have a problem with that. If the building's well-designed, meets our architectural standards that we just adopted, I don't think that having an over-length building is going to be a problem here. So these are the things that they've asked for deviations. So that's that balance of public benefits and code deviations where, you know, the code says we need to kind of come out in front if we're going to approve this development agreement. So the approval factors in the code, this is 1985-120. So the first one, compatibility with and impact on adjacent land uses and surrounding neighborhoods. This is part of our downtown. We've envisioned mid-rise development in this area for a number of years. We think that this is in line with that vision and expectations. Number two, adequacy of and impact on community facilities, including utilities, roads, public transportation, parks, rec, and schools. We included an additional park in downtown, recognizing that we were going to have a bunch of housing units coming online over the next 20 years. We also added a park impact fee that they will be paying. The roads and they're going through traffic evaluation, and we'll need to go through that and get concurrency and pay traffic impact fees like any other developer. Number three, the potential benefits of the proposal to the community. Talked about those earlier. And then lastly, effect upon the comprehensive plan. We recently amended a number of goals and policies in our city center, and specifically in our downtown, envisioning projects just like this. So this checks all the boxes in terms of the code required criteria for approval. So again, this is the picture. I put it towards the end of the slide deck. You guys have seen it a number of times. It has not changed. There's a couple late changes that did not make it into your packet that I need to explain. They will make it into the ordinance moving forward between now and council if you guys decide to do that. One of the items, you see this pink area in between what's labeled Phase 1 and Phase 3. This pink area is called a MEWS, M-E-W-S, and that is a pedestrian-only kind of access way. And one of the things that we, because we were using this to basically break down the block and create, make sure that there were mobility options through the block. This needs to have an easement on it that's open to the public. So that's what this diagram is showing is basically an area that's going to get a recorded kind of public access easement to ensure that it remains open to the public. And then the other thing I have up here in my little cloud, they wanted to include some language in the development agreement that says basically if this, so right now under state statute, under the MFTE provisions, multifamily tax exemption, it allows for cities to add a 12-year extension after the initial MFTE expires. We have not done that locally. Our code does not have that provision adopted today. And Trent is basically asking that we put some language in the development agreement that says, if we should happen to amend our code during the term of the development agreement, which is the next 30 years, where we allow for an extension of MFTE beyond that initial 8-year, which they will likely take advantage of, that they would want the option to be able to do that as well. And we thought that seemed reasonable. That's a whole other conversation for you guys somewhere down the road. So with that, there's two options: adopt the proposed ordinance or do not adopt the proposed ordinance. The mayor's recommendation is to adopt the proposed ordinance. And if you choose that option, the motion is a little bit different than what's in your agenda bill packet. And the reason is I missed the noticing deadline for the mirror. Unfortunately, it's property posting of 10 days, mirror of 14 days, which means I needed to have it in the newspaper last week for us to make the March 19th hearing. So unfortunately, if you guys are comfortable moving this along to public hearing, it would be April 2nd instead of March 19th. And with that, I'm open for questions.
Councilman McDaniel?
Thank you. A couple questions. So it has 1,600 units, and then 36 are going to be potentially affordable housing. Is that?
No,
No, it's not. What is it then?
ownership housing.
38.
Oh.
38 potentially home ownership.
38.
Correct, 38.
The number would potentially be 0 affordable housing.
Gotcha. All right. So is the 1,600 units apartments, and then these would be the townhouse or whatever the surrounding scenarios?
It doesn't have to be. So right now, this first building is almost surely going to be apartments. They have said that this building in the northwest corner, if ultimately we don't want a city hall there, and that's, like I said, a whole other conversation for another night, this building will, if it doesn't go for office or hotel, and those are choices, the other choice is housing. And what they've said is there's a possibility that in that last phase, they may want to consider stacked condominiums. So the development agreement allows for it to be ownership. They could be condominiums or they could be apartments. It's at the developer's discretion.
Okay. And they can be built at any time during the next 30 years?
Anytime.
Okay. The next question I'm going to have is going to be on the MFTE. So right now, when we had the original conversation, they came in 8 years, what we had talked about. And then I thought the 12 had restrictions on 20% being required to be a certain set of housing.
So, right. So right now, what we've basically asked them is to agree not to do the 12. The 12 requires some affordable housing, but the problem for us is more if we go forward with the tax increment financing district, having this property be tax exempt for 12 years is a significant impact to the amount of revenue we would get from creating a tax increment area. So they have said, sure, we will agree not to do the 12, just do the 8. But what they've said is if the city somewhere down the road, in the next 29 years, decides it's going to change its code to allow for developers to add a 12-year at the end of their initial 8-year, that they want the ability to do that too.
Gotcha.
And I think that's fine because frankly, I don't see you guys doing that today. Now 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows? But that's a conversation we can all have down the road. We just have to remember we've written this into the development agreement for Trent.
Gotcha. Now, does our current code allow you to do 12 and then come back for the 8? Because I thought at one time we had a conversation where you could double stack.
So currently, what our code allows for is either an 8-year initial term or a 12-year initial term.
You can't
And
just.
that's it.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
it. What we're authorized to do under state law, but we have not done, is to add an additional 12 years to either an initial 8-year, so 8 plus 12, or 12 plus 12. But we don't have that authorization in code right now. You guys would have to adopt that in order for the plus 12s to be something we could do at all.
Gotcha. Thank you. Last two questions. Schools, 0. So impact fees, is that pretty normal for these kind of things? Or like, I assume that 1,600 units is gonna have maybe a few children in it, but we've got a school impact fees of 0. Is that, it's new to me, so is that normal?
Normal,
For this kind of development, when you
well,
get this big?
so let me say this, and unfortunately, I think Trent is out hanging a sign. So he might get here before we're done. What I will tell you is most of the units will be 2 bedrooms and 1 bedrooms.
Okay.
There will be children in these buildings at the end of the day. Right now, the school district and their capital plan identifies that they have unused capacity in the existing schools that are in Federal Way right now. So that's why the school impact fees went to 0, is their position right now is they have, and part of it is homeschooling, part of it is the pandemic. They didn't get the number of kids coming back to the schools that they had expected. So what they have told us is there's additional capacity in the existing schools that are in the city right now. So you could have things like this build, and those kids that happen to be in these buildings, they would go wherever they're gonna go, and there might be space for them today.
Okay.
Sorry, just one additional detail, which you might find significant on that as well. I do want to point out that they are vested to the school impact fee of 0 for the duration of the agreement. So if the school impact fee changes at any point, 15, 20 years even from now, and goes up from 0 to some other number, they would still be locked in at the 0. So that is a significant thing that was negotiated as part of the agreement.
So never school impact fees?
That is correct.
Okay. What would it have been? Do we have an estimate of what the impact fee would have been, or a close
So
approximation?
right now, the impact fee is 0, and that is what the school district is asking for, was asking for, and that's what council authorized, the school impact fee. So right now, the answer is 0. The impact fee has varied significantly over the past decade plus in the city, but at the moment, what the school district wants and what the city has authorized is 0.
Okay. And is it, just out of curiosity, because I don't know this, is it just large buildings, or do residential homes also have school impact fees?
It's both multifamily and single family, so it's all residential units of any type.
Gotcha. So is residential's being built right now don't have a school impact fee then?
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. And the last one's parks. You have $2,200. Is that per unit or total?
Per unit.
Per unit. Okay. Thank you.
Lydia?
Yes, thank you. The exemptions that you mentioned, I forgot what you called them, but this one, deviations. It's not a question, maybe it's a concern. So any developer can come and make these kinds of requests in the future, right?
As part of a development agreement. So development agreements are a negotiated contract between the city and the property owner. It allows the city to deviate specifically for certain codes if it believes that's appropriate, and as part of that give and take, that's part of that negotiation. So to answer your question, just because we've agreed to it here with Trent does not mean that if we have started negotiation with Merlone Geyer for the commons, that they start with all of these. That they start with a clean slate, just like Trent did. And as we start to ask for things from them as a property owner, they then ask for things from us in terms of usually code deviations. And you've got to kind of keep it in balance as you move forward. So the more they ask for, the more we get to ask for. And if ultimately they don't ask for much, then they don't get very many deviations. So there's kind of a level of significance, and it's usually on a parcel or a case-by-case basis to determine
So it's
that.
a common practice?
Yes.
Okay.
And I also want to point out for the council members that, of course, it's council's decision to initiate initial negotiations of any development agreement with a developer. So if council's concerned about authorizing any potential code deviations for a project, you don't have to authorize staff to negotiate a development agreement. That's your choice, right? If absent a development agreement, they have to comply with code, period.
Thank you.
Council President?
Thank you, Chair Doby. So, a couple of questions. you have $1 million agreement for access to parking. So I'm assuming, because there's not really any parking, looks like it's available between the buildings. Of course, there won't be any buildings there for building 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
So is that where they're going to be parking?
Yes, so if you go back to this diagram, so they're going to buy all of this. And so all of this surface parking north of the PAC and potentially up in here, they will own that. And they could put up construction fencing the next day and keep everybody out of that. What we have negotiated is the allowance for us to continue to park on that property as long as they don't need it for construction. So for a number of years, there will still be some surface parking spaces on the property that will technically be on their property, that they're gonna let the public park on. So there's a value to that, and that's why it's kind of shows up as being something of value.
So what happens when all the buildings are built?
Well, we have talked, I'm gonna remind you, we've talked that we have a parking problem, because at some point, all of our parking for the PAC is gone, except for what's been negotiated on the Walmart parking lot and down at Town Square Park. So we have a problem about not enough parking for the PAC that we have to solve somewhere in our downtown area. And, you know, at some point, we need to start talking about how we're going to do that. But it's coming. We have a parking problem.
We have it now.
Okay, the other question, it looks like the buildings are what, 5-story, 6-story high?
They're shown as 5 stories of wood frame over 1 or 2 floors of concrete podium. So they're a total of either 6 or 7 floors.
So they're actually, you know, higher than the surrounding because they're up on the pedestal. So does that, it makes it about 8 stories high really, or 9 stories?
Well, the way that the code reads is building height is measured from the adjacent grade of the property. And so, yes, but that property sits up above, because it's currently elevated above, like, at least the south end of it is significantly lower. So when you look at this, they actually show 3 stories. If you look at this picture, there's actually 3 floors of what's showing as pedestal on this south end. So this could be 3 with 5 stories over the top of it. So it might show up as 8 stories from that.
So is it 12 stories before they can get a view of the mountain, or is it?
So I don't know the answer to that, because I haven't been that high. But the reality is if you want to go taller than this, then it moves to steel construction, so it's steel frame.
Yeah.
And then the price per square foot's just completely different.
Sure, so I'm just trying to visualize, because I know when you're on top of the parking garage, you have a better view of the mountain. So will this be as high as the parking garage?
This will be taller than the parking garage.
Oh, interesting. I know we did a drone many years ago, and I think we got a view of downtown, believe it or not, all the way downtown Seattle from 12 stories up, believe it or not. And you could see the water as well.
Well, and one of the things, again, because of the way we changed our code to have a maximum FAR instead of a maximum building height, they could, even though this drawing is showing basically mid-rise buildings, they could build a 20-story building on this property if they wanted to. It's a matter of cost is what's keeping them from that.
Okay, one last question, because we're talking about for all the building to 2047 to be built, it's like a 23-year period. What if Trent decides to sell? What happens then to all these agreements?
Yeah, so the development agreement basically has a provision where they can assign their rights to a new buyer. So they could, they could end up building phase 1 and selling phases 2, 3, and 4 to separate buyers. Each one of those would need to go with it a certain amount of the entitlement. and the provisions of when those blocks would need to build remain intact. So the buyers have to live by the rules of the development agreement that we negotiate. So that's part of the reason why we put this timing requirement on all of these phases, to make sure that all of it gets built by a certain time, even if it's builders we haven't met yet.
Thank you.
Councilmember Trent?
Thank you, Chair. Keith, thank you for your report. I do have two questions. The first one is in regard to the price. So the low appraisal was $12.8 million, and the high is 13.8. For the average of about 13.3. Why can't we negotiate with them to meet us with that number, 13.3 instead of 1.9, I mean 12.9?
Everything's a negotiation. If the council, so right now, we need to demonstrate that we're selling the property for market value. And right now, the market value is 12.8 to 13.8. So we can check that box that we're at least proposing to sell the property at market value. If the council believes that this list here of the $10 million plus the things that are listed underneath it are not enough, there is an opportunity for you guys to ask for more. And I keep looking over here because I'm not sure why Trent isn't here, but so that's a valid question, council member. I think we felt like they got to where they needed to get to in terms of us meeting our requirements. And I see Councilmember Walsh has a question as well. And it's just, it's if you don't think we got enough, I think that's clearly something you can ask for. I think if there's a expectation you have, like for example, if you think we should get to the average or the midpoint of this range, I think that's something that you can say.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking out loud. I mean, if we can get to that mid number, we will get additional about $400,000 more in public benefits. So that's one point. The other point that I want to ask is you mentioned about the creation of jobs.
Yep.
Are we having some type of agreement with Trent where they will hire X percentage of people who live in the city? Or how does that work? If we say this will create jobs in the city, is there a commitment from Trent to hire resident of the city?
Unfortunately, they're not here to answer that question. I mean, my guess is that most of those jobs are going to be in restaurant, service. You know, it's those ground floor uses underneath a mixed-use building. It's your cafe and maybe your bar and your restaurant and maybe your dry cleaners or whatnot. Most of those people will live here because they're not necessarily high-paying jobs, so you don't have people necessarily commuting to those places for employment. They will likely be coming from this community, but I have not heard from them on whether or not they have what kind of outreach they're going to do in terms of filling those jobs. And I don't know, Tanya, if you want to have any conversation about this or not. But
And I'd point out that there's nothing in the agreement that legally obligates them to do that.
Councilmember Walsh? Can you hear us? Okay, we'll move on. Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, a quick follow-up on the parking situation. On that final design, it looks like the only way to get to the parking for the PAC is through their property. Is there any public right-of-way or easement or anything that provides us with unlimited access to it?
yeah, so this road here, can you see my cursor? So that's that Road A that I talked about. So that is envisioned to be public right-of-way. And then this little turnaround bulb, which has some parking for disabled folks, primarily. That will be public as well. So all of this is public, accessible through either rights because of public right-of-way or through easements.
Okay. And then I was at a store on Sunday, and like you said, the parking is horrible there. It was probably 60 cars into somebody else's parking lot. Do we have an estimate of how many actual parking slots we would need for the pack on some of the busier days and stuff? Do we even have a ballpark on that?
383.
383? That's a pretty accurate number. All right. And then I agree with the maybe potential, because $1 million or what we're being given in this deal is parking, and in my mind, it's just empty space. So I agree with maybe seeing if there's an ask for the amount a little bit, a little something extra.
Okay, Councilmember Walsh,
Yes, can you hear me now?
we can.
All right, sorry about joining late. Question, and it may have been addressed earlier, but like I said, I joined late, I'm not sure just how far along were you.
We can't hear you now.
You cannot hear me?
Move closer to your phone.
Okay. If Trent did not meet the build-out schedule, what are the ramifications?
Yeah, if they, so council member, if they end up, say, just mothballing their project, or if they build the first phase and they find that the lease up is not where they wanted it to be and they want to sit, the city has the ability to purchase the property back. So we can, based on what they paid for it on a square foot basis, we can buy it back.
Okay. All right, buy it back at the original cost or inflated, or the market value at that time, or what would be what would that be at?
It's the price that would be determined by a new appraisal approved by both parties at the time of buyback.
All right, thank you.
I want to jump in and ask a follow-up question on that. Is it based on the appraisal today, what we're selling it for, or if the value goes up, then the price goes up?
Correct. So let's say 10 years from now, they fail to put in something within the deadline that's required, and we buy it back. The price for that buyback is going to be determined by an appraisal at that date. In other words, 10 years from now, it would be appraised. If that amount's a lot higher, then that amount's a lot higher.
But we don't have to do it that way, correct?
That's correct. There's nothing we could rewrite that section subject to their approval to be different than that, yes.
I mean, could we take, at the price we're selling, say, okay, at today, each of these parcels is worth X, and then they're set the price, so there is no escalation? It's, you sell it back at what we sold it to you?
That is absolutely something that we could discuss with them. By the way, I just received an email saying Trent would be here in 5 minutes, and that was 3 minutes ago. He thought the meeting started at 6, so.
I see, I see. Okay. Okay, Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. So, you talked about subsidized rent for the ground floor retail, possibly.
That's one of the choices.
Why would we do that?
To fill it up.
But do we do that for anyone else in the downtown area or anywhere in the city of Federal Way?
So these spaces and the cost per square feet for these will be dramatically more expensive than the existing older single-story retail that's in our downtown area. And so, like, I think what you don't want to have happen, like, so think about the price per square foot to rent one of these retail spaces versus the price per square foot in Hillside Plaza is going to be dramatically different. And you want the new businesses to fill these spaces and not necessarily go into empty spaces in the surrounding properties. And so there may be a benefit to providing a subsidy to get those spaces filled, to bring that vibrancy to, because it's gonna, they're gonna be on the spaces adjacent to the Civic Plaza. So I think there's again, a reason why there's a value to that, I think, from a community standpoint.
Is that actually written in the development agreement?
It is. So the specific retail substance, retail subsidy is a 20% discount from market retail lease rates for at least 12,000 square feet of leasable space. At least half of that 12,000 square feet must be provided during phases 1 and 2, and it's for a duration of 50 years.
For 50 years?
Correct?
I have a concern with that, just because I've been waiting for this to be built up for a long time, as has everyone else, but I also want to make sure that we are not providing things to get this built up that we don't provide for other areas of the city. So I have a concern with that. The open space, the park fees, the $2,200 per unit is going to go, I read, to the Civic spot, the Civic Plaza.
No.
That's, I read that somewhere in here.
I think you're confusing the open space requirements with the park impact fee.
So it says a park impact fee of $2,200 per residential unit to be applied towards Civic Plaza construction. It says it right here.
Yeah, no, I said, oh, as in not, I didn't say no, sorry.
Okay. I'm
To be
really-
clear.
Okay.
Sorry, which section is that, so I can just? 10.3, thank you. Yes, so you are absolutely correct, we are incorrect. It says it's to be applied towards Civic Plaza construction.
So that would be then just the first building.
So if you think about it, the first building, and let's say that there's, I can't do the math in my head, but let's say there's 200 units. It's going to be more than that. It might be, it's somewhere between 200 and 300 units, but let's say 200 times 2,200. What's that number? I'm looking at my lawyer.
Yeah, you don't want to look at the lawyer for math questions.
100,000.
So 200 by
450.
$450,000?
Yeah, round.
So that doesn't come close to the $5 million that we're going to spend on the plaza. So yes, that will help, right now, what we had generally envisioned is the existing balance on the property and the $5 million commitment of the plaza is about a wash. It works out to be about $10 million between what we own the property now and putting $5 million into the plaza. So what this means is if it's about $500,000, there'll be about $500,000 left over to do other park improvements somewhere in the city.
Okay.
And to the council member's point, I do think that we need to tweak that language to make that abundantly clear. So thank you for pointing that out.
You're welcome. So park impact fees are paid at the time they get their permit or occupancy?
Building permit.
So for the rest of these buildings, because they're 20 years out or so, if we're going to build a park downtown as we have voted to do that, we're going to have to probably, as a city, come up with the funding before we get the money from this construction.
So, when we acquire property and build a new park downtown, that timing will be based on demand, which will mean that those units will probably already be there or at least be in the pipeline. Part of that is part of capital projects and decisions you guys get to make in terms of prioritization of park facilities in the city. And, that's, again, I think you guys control a lot of that.
So for the public art, it says that there'll be no less than $750,000 that Trent puts in?
So they're going to do art, and then we have 2% of capital projects. So like 2% of the Civic Plaza will need to go to art, which will be a publicly funded public art piece. Trent will do, and they've committed to $750,000 of privately funded public art. So it will be not in one of their like interior courtyards up on the 3rd floor of an apartment building. It will be somewhere down that's accessible to the community as well.
And that's over the entire construction period?
Yes.
So the our 2% for the Civic Plaza will be built by the time the Civic Plaza is completed. Our 2% for the, whatever we
Yes,
choose for public
yes.
art.
They
There.
will probably be incorporated into that project in some way.
Is it typical and normal that for a project such as this that spans so many years, that we would have $0 for school impact fees for the entire length of the project?
Yeah, I'll answer that. This kind of is an overarching theme to many of the council members' various questions today, which is that is not common to be in place in a city's code, but it is common for those types of things to be negotiated as part of a development agreement where you're negotiating departures from code. So it's not common for normal developments, but it is common in development agreements to agree to and negotiate terms just like that for school impact fees and other impact fees for that matter as well.
So as many people know, I watch other council meetings. I know that the city of Auburn voted, I can't remember how much for school impact fees for the Federal Way School District, but it's not zero, like ours is this year. There is a number associated with it. So I have a concern with having that as zero for the entire length of construction, because we don't know how our schools will be impacted by this. And so I have a concern with that too.
So one of the things, and just
Can I answer that?
Go ahead.
You sat up here on the dais when we all talked about school impact fees and how we missed out on 15 years of development. And this council voted unanimously to take school impact fees to zero. So to have that concern today, after all we went through over the last 3 years, surprises me. That all of a sudden now, when we're finally getting someone here to develop, that the question comes up about school impact fees.
I've
So,
always been concerned with school impact fees.
but this council voted in order to have development happen that we would go to zero. And they're here because we actually did that, one of the reasons. So to now bring that up at this point of the day to say I'm concerned, I think is a little disingenuous of what we should be talking about. And it should be more about how we get the development done and not put the staff on the hot spot to say, why weren't we talking about impact fees? Because everyone up here voted on it. In fact, you did also to
I
vote
did.
to go to zero. So I
For the-
think we
but-
have to
But
go
not
with.
for the next 20-some years.
No,
If I could actually point something out here. So the code that the council adopted at that point, we put a line in the code that said for developments in city center core, the impact fee may not exceed zero, period. So right now, there is an open-ended until council changes that code again. Currently, under code, the school impact fee is zero for forever, for developments in specific zones, including CCC, which is where this is.
And one of the reasons, just to kind of maybe replumb this, and I see Councilmember Walsh has a question, but the reason why developers do development agreements is for predictability. There are a few code deviations, a couple things that are asked for, but generally, they want to know if they're going to invest in this project, that they can understand what the costs are going to be, for the length of the project. Looking at our history and, school impact fees being as high as $22,000 a unit for multifamily, there's a reason to be, I think, apprehensive about leaving that door open if I was a developer wanting to build in Federal Way.
Oh, there's no doubt that our school impact fees were completely out of line, completely out of line. And there's no doubt that it did stop development here. But I'm concerned with the future, and, I mean, we're looking to build in for the future. This isn't for, I may not even be alive by the time the last building is built. I mean, we're planning for the future, and we don't know how our schools are going to, what their needs will be 20 years from now. So, and we don't know what the city's needs will be 20 years from now, but this is a development agreement that is going to go for 30 years, and so we need to make sure that it meets the needs that we are anticipating for the next 30 years. So when you talked about the building length, over length, I don't understand that.
Sure. Right now, in our code, in the design guidelines, it talks about buildings shall not exceed 250 feet in length. And what they've asked for is to go beyond that 250 feet in length because they believe that they're going to design really nice buildings, and that length will have enough modulation in it that it will not be perceived as a monolithic wall, which is the reason why we have design guidelines that limit it to 250 feet.
Okay, that was my next question, why we would have limits on that. Okay.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yes, I'm done.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Going back to
Sorry.
the public art, now, the amount, the contribution towards public art, that is over the lifetime of the project?
Yes, that's correct.
And it seems as though it may be wise to have, break it down so that there's so much per phase, rather than, just all being loaded at the end. Any thoughts on that?
From a legal perspective, obviously, that's not in there currently, but that is something we could specify more, like 250K for phase X, 250K for phase Y. That is something that could be done. It's not in the current language.
Yeah, I think that should be considered.
Councilmember Honda, I think I interrupted you, so you could go back in when I went to Mr. Walsh.
I would, at some point, now that Trent's here, I would like him to come up and address some of the asks from the council. I have a list. I don't know if the council's ready for that or if they want to keep asking.
I actually do have one more question.
Okay.
To get over to the right.
It says somewhere in this agreement that Trent will submit a building permit no later than January 1st, 2027. So if they waited that long to submit a building permit, and I hope they don't, actual building would happen when? 2-3 years after that?
Building permit would be issued in 2027, 28, 29, so like, that would be 29, 2030 for first occupants.
Is there a chance that that will happen sooner than 2027?
I think we hope so. That's a question I think I'd like for Trent to field. But that's obviously we would want it to, I'm hoping, once the development agreement's approved, they move forward with design, bring permits in as soon as possible, and we get something moving as quick as possible. But they wanted a little bit of flexibility just in case it took them a while to line up investors. But I'll let Trent address maybe the timing of the first project, if you don't mind.
Oh, no, no problem. And the second, my other question is, if we don't see any development until 28, 29, 30, the parking for the PAC remains as it is without any impact on it?
That's as long as they don't need it for construction, which if they're not building anything, then it seems like that's the expectation I would have.
Okay, thanks.
I have two questions. One, when you talk about the subsidy for the retail space, that's in lieu of subsidy for subsidized rental, correct, of the apartment buildings or the condos, correct?
That would be in lieu of.
In lieu of. So
yeah.
Instead of subsidizing the person renting to live there, we're subsidizing the business to be there.
Yes.
Okay. And then the plaza, Deputy Councilmember Honda brings up an interesting point of the park fees going to the plaza. Wouldn't that be something the council has to decide, that that's actually a park that we want to subsidize? I mean, we voted for the park impact fee, but nobody, and we've always thought about something downtown, but that's the first time I've heard that's actually now going to be a park that we're subsidizing. I knew we were going to pay for it, but using that fee to to subsidize it.
And you're talking about the Civic Plaza specifically?
Civic Plaza.
So I think that's exactly what is, one of the many questions that's teed up with this development agreement, right? That you have to approve whether or not that language that puts park impact fees toward the Civic Plaza is something you want to
I
do.
mean, if we do this, we've agreed that we're gonna pay for that public space. I mean, that's not a question, it's just a matter, are we paying it out of our capital budget or somewhere, or we're gonna allocate dollars? But nobody's asked if we're gonna take this park impact fee to go to that. That would have to come to council to decide.
Well, it will come to council as part of this development agreement,
Okay.
I guess is what I'm saying. If you approve the development agreement as currently written, that's what you'll be authorizing.
But I guess my point is, nobody from Parks has come to us and said, this is where we want to use it. And we went all that time through deciding to have it, and it's kind of being decided to spend the money on the Civics Plaza without actually saying, is this where we want to spend it? I mean, I get we're going to spend the money anyway, it's just, are we using that fund? That's my,
Yes.
yeah, I mean,
Short
I get
answer,
it, we
yes,
are,
yeah.
but that was never, it was never on my thought pattern that that's where that money was going to get used.
So I think that is another question. That was language that was proposed by the Trent team. So again, I would want them to talk about how important that is for them that we leave that written the way it is currently drafted versus potentially tweaking it. Do you want to move to that phase?
I don't see any other blue mics, so let's move to that.
Okay, Trent, I've got a list for you.
You want me to come up there?
Yes, please. So let me tell you what my notes mean. So the $10 million plus the list, Councilmember Tran asked, we're coming in at about 12.9, which is within the bracketed 12.8 to 13.8, but his question is can we get to more of a midpoint, which would be about a $300,000 bump. Councilmember Walsh asked for, could the art that you are funding be specific to being implemented in phases, so it doesn't all just happen at the end? Timing of the first phase, you heard Councilmember Honda's question about why the flexibility, and then park impact fees to the plaza. I think you guys suggested that. So I will leave you with the mic and
Okay.
wish you well.
Hello, everyone. Okay, why don't I start at the end here and work backwards. The park impact fees to the plaza. I guess our concern all along has been the funding mechanism for the park. We think it's, or the Civic Plaza, I should be calling it. The Civic Plaza is very, very central to this development, and we believe to the success of the development. So our concern was that we would be embarking on the construction. The first phase is actually almost 380 units. It's probably a $160 million project. And we feel its success is extremely dependent upon the park being built, the Civic Plaza being built. So our big concern was, did the city have the funds to fund the Civic Plaza in a timely manner? So our thought was, okay, well, if we're advancing hundreds of thousands of dollars in park impact fees, let's have them be directed towards that Civic Plaza so we ensure that you have enough money to get it built. That's the simple reason for that. Any questions on that?
I see none, but it sounds reasonable.
Okay. Subsidized retail space, we heard that was something that was desired by the council. So, and we felt, again, the success of the plaza, the success of the overall area is very dependent on it being an active space, and active retail during the day and evening is critical to that. So we welcome the opportunity to redirect that subsidy to the retail spaces to fill them up as quick as possible. and create opportunities for local businesses to thrive there, rather than having a subsidy for low-income housing or something when we know there's going to be a lot of that at the Sound Transit station. So,
Can I ask a question?
yes.
Have you used that in other developments that you've built?
No, it's never been an option. It's all the other jurisdictions we work in insist on affordable housing, so we've always had to provide the affordable housing instead.
Okay, thank you.
Timing of the first phase, I guess I'm not quite sure what the specific of that question was.
I think if you look at the phasing plan, so that's, what is it, 2.5 years from now? So I guess the question is why isn't this sooner than 27? Kind of, that's part of the question?
Oh, well, it's a 30-year development agreement. We don't want it to take 30 years. We don't expect that it'll take 30 years, but this is I don't know, it's a $600 million investment into this city. It's a big deal, and it takes a long time to raise that kind of money. And we don't know the depth of the market as far as how quickly units will be absorbed. So we need to have that much time for the overall development to get to mature. We don't expect it'll take that long for the first phase to go, but we just, something this large, we just have to have that kind of flexibility to justify to our equity partners that we're not being forced to do something sooner than the market will accept it. So that's the reason for the flexibility, but our expectation would these phases will go faster than they're currently, than the outside dates are indicating. Art by phase, yeah, we're perfectly fine with putting with spreading those dollar amounts out into the various phases. I think we did something similar for one of the other commitments that we're making was, do you remember what that was?
No, I don't, but yes, we did.
I think the retail subsidy is actually an example
Oh,
of that.
yeah, the retail subsidy, yeah. So that we would do a certain amount in each phase. So we're perfectly fine doing that with the art as well. Because frankly, it's probably going to have more of it on the front end than in the later phases anyway, because we want phase 1 to be so successful that we then immediately start phase 2. We want phase 2 to be so successful that we then immediately start phase 3. So we're definitely going to be front-loading that art budget in phase 1. What was the last thing? 300K.
So, yeah, let me get to that slide. All right. So I think the point here is, this is a range. You guys kind of are towards the lower end.
Okay.
I think the question from Councilmember Tran was the midpoint would be like 13, can't do the math, 13.3? So the question is can this number or something in here bring this number up so that it gets closer to like 13.3? I think that was the ask.
Okay. I think that the proposal that we've put forward to the purchase price and the public benefits and the other items that we're proposing is a fair price for this property and for this development. So I'm not prepared to increase our offer at this time.
I have a question on that one. One of the comments that was made earlier was the buyback option was maybe adjusting that to have some locked-in costs in case that does fall back. Would that be something you might be able to take in consideration?
So just to clarify that, he's talking about should Trent not develop a phase within the upper bound of when those phases occur, the city has the option to buy back that phase, and the current draft says that we'll buy it back at an appraisal that's done at the time that the buyback occurs. In other words, it would account for increase in value over time. And the question was, how about locking in the and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing this, how about locking in the appraisal price to current day value as opposed to future value, which might have gone up significantly? That was the question.
Well, I think that's maybe a double-edged sword for both of us, because if we're not moving forward with the developments, it might be because the economy's in the tank and the property's worth less. So you may not want to be paying the price, today's price, in the future if there's something wrong with property values. I think getting an appraisal at that time is the fairest for both parties. I mean, and that appears to be what we're doing right now. We're talking about an appraised value in today's dollars, so.
Maybe I'll jump in there a little bit.
Okay.
Because I'm the one who asked the question, I think. If we're going to put the property together and sell it, what appears to me to be a fair price, fair, economy and all that. But I think the issue that I have is we get down to 2037 or whenever the dates are, and whatever reason you decide we're not going to do the project, or the economy's gone down, you can't do the project, or, we're going to off-sell it to somebody else because the values have gone up so high, we're not going to do the project. I think there needs to be some option for the city to buy the property back that you haven't developed at a pre-negotiated price. I don't know. Because we're negotiating the price today on going into it. I look at it, and maybe if we should be able to buy it back if we're going to, for whatever reason, it's not going to happen and it's 30 years later.
But
And
we've
it's a
closed-
double-edged
We've closed on the
sword.
land and carried it
Yeah.
and entitled it and increased the value of it. I mean, it's, to then sell it back at its original cost that's not a sound business decision that a developer would make.
Well, I guess it's something to, when we look out 2047, 2042, or when's the very last piece going to get done? I mean, if everything goes well and we want you to develop really, really fast because the economy gets good and you can do that, there's a lag there where there might be some point where, it's never going to happen, and we we need to have some mechanism to cut the waiting and do something else. I guess that's what I'm really thinking about when I look at it. Does that make sense? Maybe it doesn't make sense what I'm saying, but we want this to be the most successful project Federal Way's ever had. We want you to do really, really well. But there may become some point where we have to have some mechanism to say, this has gone so long, maybe we should have a negotiated buyback of some of the property if it's not going to happen.
And I think we do have that in the agreement. The sole thing we're kind of going back and forth on is whether the price that we would buy it back at is a future price or a current price. Currently, there is absolutely a buyback option for any of the phases that aren't started building permit-wise by the deadlines. We have that in there. It's just whether that amount we buy it back for is the new appraisal or whether it's something else other than the appraisal at that time.
So if the price of the property has gone down, then it gets appraised and we buy it back at pennies on the dollar.
That's exactly right. That's how it's currently formulated.
And if it goes up, then it's buyback at
Much higher,
much
potentially.
higher.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, mine is more of a comment than a question. As a proponent of affordable housing, and considering that we are going to get a lot of affordable housing through the various development that are in the pipeline, I think going for retail subsidy is a great idea. because we do have a lot of businesses that we hope come into our city to do business, but costs could be something that would prohibit businesses from coming to our city. So I do like that. My question then is, how are you going to structure the increase? Or at some point, if you want to increase the rent, then what would that look like? Would the initial renters or businesses be grandfathered in at some point and then just leave them alone, and then new businesses, maybe a different pay structure? Or how would that even look like? What would that look like?
Yeah, no, we've made the commitment that it's a 20% discount from market rate rents for a period of 50 years. So if someone has a business, and typically leases are 5 years and sometimes or additional 5-year options. So we're talking about 5 or 10-year long businesses. Hopefully they stay and keep renewing after that. But if they don't, then it's just, there's a 50-year clock. And if they use the first 5 or 10 years, then there's 45 or 40 years left for the next tenant on that space, so.
Great. Thank you. I really like that proposal, so thank you very much. And sometimes us being the pace setters, if you know, to do something new and innovative and very inclusive, I think is a great idea. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. So if we get $10 million from Trent Development for the property, we pay off what we owe on the property, then does the rest of that go into paying for Civic Plaza? Or how are we going to?
That's not a question for me, is it?
That's a question for Steve Groom, who I don't want to channel, but what I would tell you is there is about $5 million in change left over. Whether or not we use that money to fund the Civic Plaza, or whether Steve wants to put that money somewhere else and take out debt to build the Civic Plaza, that'll be a conversation between you guys and Steve somewhere down the road when it comes time. So the first phase of this, and just to give you guys a sense for timing, the first phase of this is we agree on hiring a designer. We will get a designer together, we'll talk about programs, we'll meet with the community and talk about what they want, and we'll come up with designs. And ultimately, that comes forward to you guys to approve. So you guys will get the say in the design of the Civic Plaza. And at that time, just like you guys talked about funding street diets tonight, there's going to be well, here's the price tag for that. And Steve's going to have to tell you guys how you're going to pay for it, whether it's the balance of the money that they provided from buying the property, or whether it's from some other funding source.
Well, to Mr. Trent's concern about how the city is going to afford Civic Plaza, in my opinion, if we have the money from the sale of this property, it should go into Civic Plaza. In my opinion, I'm just one of 7. But it's important to us that we have Civic Plaza there. And it's important to you. And if we've got the money, I would just like to make sure that we are using it for the right purpose.
I think that's a great recommendation.
I'm glad we
Councilmember
agree.
Honda.
We can put it in the development agreement if you want.
Let's do that.
This is the part where I tell you about maintaining flexibility, just like he said about the project phases.
We'll maintain flexibility. Council President.
Thank you. I'm so happy, thank you, for a $600 million investment in our downtown. I mean, I don't know how many years I've been waiting to see something going on in our downtown. I mean, we're way behind the 8 ball on this whole thing, so I'm so happy that we're going to move forward, and thank you for taking the chance on us. And I'm hoping that we can do everything to make you successful, and that we can have an attractive downtown, that people will want to live and stay here and not move away. So thank you for putting the townhouses around the building 1. I do hope that they're stacked condos instead of apartments. I think we do better overall with our first-time home buyers and with our city as a whole having skin in the game, where we have ownership of what we're doing. And so, we've had a long discussion for many years here what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Does retail come first and then the housing, or the housing come first and then the retail? You know, if you ask each of them, it's going to be one or the other. And I'm finally come to the conclusion that we need to move forward with both, but we better get that retail housing going so that we have market rate housing. I mean, you can have, I think we've hit our targets currently for low income or below market. But, you know, we can have that. It's just that you have to have the business to help afford what you want to do otherwise. And so thank you for moving forward. I used to talk to the mayor of Bellevue. He was Dr. Davidson. He was a dentist. His name was Donald Davidson. They used to call him Dr. Duck, Donald Duck. But, you know, he said when they first, 40 years ago, when they first built their first high-rise 20-story building in downtown Bellevue, people were ready to scalp him because it was a 20-story building, PACCAR. It is now surrounded by 40-story buildings and more, with lots of cranes building. Probably that's not going to happen here, but we can certainly have a downtown that we can be proud of. And so I'm glad we're moving forward. Thank you.
I don't see any more blue microphones. Do I have a motion?
I move to forward the proposed ordinance to the first reading on April 2nd, 2024.
I'll second that. Is Jack still on the, so Jack, you can vote too. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
One last question, Keith.
Yeah.
You know, we're
Probably
moving-
not your last question, but
Well, no, for right now, we're moving this forward. If council members have a few questions, do they come to you and before we bring this up in April?
yes. So if any of the council members want to move any of the conversations we've had tonight forward, it gives me an opportunity to talk to Trent. We can see if there is some additional language we want to put in the DA before it gets to council on the 2nd. You know, we can do that, but like, that's, again, it's better for you guys to give me, I've heard some things. I'll have a conversation with him later this week about some of the things I heard, and we'll see. And that'll be part of the presentation on the 2nd in terms of if there are any adjustments from where we are tonight.
And I think one of the adjustments that I heard general agreement on between the city and Trent was the putting in specific amounts of public art by phase. So we'll work on that in the meantime at a minimum.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to item F, which is not action, information only, comprehensive plan updates.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Yeah, I'm not going anywhere, sorry. You get me for a little bit longer. Okay, so this evening, we're going to continue with giving you guys summaries of the update of certain chapters of our comprehensive plan as we move through this. So hopefully there's not a lot of shock when we actually bring a draft forward to you guys this fall. This evening, we're going to do natural environment, shoreline, land use, economic development, and community services. And Tanya and Sarah are going to join me to present their respective chapters. So generally, the purpose of tonight is to tell you what's going on and at a very high level. And if you think we're pointed in the wrong direction, this is your opportunity to say, hey, I don't like where you're going. Please take it back or go the other way. That way, we don't get to the very end and have a lot of hard conversations. So again, these are the chapters we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to try and keep us rolling. So shoreline and natural environment, those are existing chapters that we have in our comprehensive plan right now. What we're talking about really is no significant changes to these chapters, but really more minor updates. Each chapter will get a brand new vision statement because in talking with the city attorney, there was a conversation and agreement that each chapter should have its own vision statement, since some of them had them and some of them didn't. So we're working on consistency from chapter to chapter. We're also adding a new goal to specifically support RIA 9, since we have a council member who gives us updates on RIA 9 from time to time, and we need to be more specific that we support the salmon recovery goals from RIA 9. We also moved, since we're including a new climate and resiliency chapter. Resiliency is about making the city strong in terms of both resiliency from man-made and natural hazards. So we're moving both geologic hazards and we're moving tree canopy to the climate chapter. So those things are coming out of natural environment and moving into climate, since that's a brand new chapter. We also moved the lakes section in the potential annexation area chapter to shorelines. And we included new policies relating to the coordination with the tribes regarding preservation of lands of cultural and historic significance. That's a new expectation from this round of GMA periodic comprehensive plan updates. Land use. All right, so proposed changes for land use. So again, added a vision statement for consistency with other chapters. We didn't used to have one. We're going to simplify the land use designation map, and I'll show you examples of where we are and where we're going, so that will make sense. We move potential annexation areas from a standalone chapter and put most of that into the land use chapter, as opposed to having a separate chapter for that. We deleted the concept plan diagram. I'll show you that and tell you why in a moment. And then we removed the zoning map from the comprehensive plan, and I'll tell you why that makes sense as well. So the existing comprehensive plan map is on the left. And what you can see from the legend is basically almost every zone has a designation on the comp plan, which basically means if you want to rezone your property, you have to also do a comprehensive plan amendment. Procedurally, that's horrific. And so what we're trying to do here on the right-hand side is really streamline the number of zones so that actually each zone will have a number, or each designation will have a number of zones associated with it. We're also taking right now each of these ordinances. These are ordinances for things like Kids Corner and Christian Faith Center and all the properties where we did something specific from a zoning standpoint, and we put those numbers on our comp plan. So again, to change any of those requires a comp plan amendment, and procedurally that's a lot. So this is basically a direction to try and make this simple and less complicated than it is right now. And this is how this works from a zoning standpoint. So the new designation's called Residential 1, and it's basically going to have all your single-family zones in it. So if I wanted to go from RS 15 to RS 7.2, I wouldn't have to do a comprehensive plan change. I would just have to ask the council to approve a rezone. And that makes it completely, it's 100% simpler than it is right now, where you have to also get a comprehensive plan amendment as well, which is limited to once a year and just brings a whole bunch of baggage with it. Similarly, now all the multifamily zones are in Residential 2. All the commercial zones go from commercial enterprise down to office park and
Corporate park.
Thank you. It's getting late. I've talked a lot today. And then we have basically mixed-use centers and mixed-use non-centers. And the reason why we did this, and I'm going to go back one. So if you look at this, this is our city center, this teal color. It shows up more like lime green. Kind of lime green on the screen, but teal on my map. This area down where our South Station is, That is going to be another centers area. It's our regional growth center, and this is our, it's our countywide center. I am really talked too much today. This is our regional growth center up here in the city center, and this is our countywide center, which we have a conditional approval for. So those will show up the same in our designation map as mixed-use centers. And that's this right here. And then the rest of it, this pink, is basically like our BC zone. It's our mixed-use non-centers. So we have mixed-use outside the centers and then mixed-use centers. And I'm getting into a lot of planning geekiness, and I apologize for that, but this is what we're planning to do. So mixed-use centers, and you can see it has city center core, but it also includes zones like RM 1800, RM 2400, and RS 15 because we have property in the South Station area that are currently zoned those, and they probably will sit that way for quite a while. Eventually, when the station comes in, which is 10 years from now, they will upzone, and so these will probably disappear at some point. But for right now, we're not suggesting upzoning all of that. We're going to have it designated for centers, but leave the zoning primarily the same for a number of those properties.
Can I interrupt and ask you a question on that real quick? Sorry.
Sure.
So right now, we have people that buy a plot of land that's zoned for some specific use, and then they come in and say, well, I'd like to change the use to something else, but that it's not zoned for. By doing this, will that all of a sudden take those areas that have been zoned for commercial and not apartments, all of a sudden, I mean, maybe that's the wrong analogy, but all of a sudden now the person can come in and make the change if it's approved by the council much simpler?
If it's within the same designation. So let's assume that you own a piece of commercial enterprise property and you want to build anything in this column. You could rezone your property to any of these without having to do a comp plan amendment. But let's assume you have a piece of RM property. I'm going to take you back to the fire station owned property on 320th. So that property was zoned RM 1800. So that's over here in residential 2. And ultimately, you guys rezoned it to CE. So that does require and still will require a comp plan amendment in addition to the zone because it's allowing a completely different use. But if you're just talking about density of the same kind of use, you know, whether you're doing multifamily at 1800 or multifamily at 3600, it's multifamily, right? And I think the question is does that really need a comprehensive plan amendment or just you guys thinking about whether the additional density there makes sense or not?
But if somebody has a commercial use and they want to go to apartment use,
Yep.
they would still have to be a comp plan change?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes. Councilmember Honda?
Keith, so if we were to do this where we don't need to do comp plan amendments, will the public still have as much input as they do now?
There's still a public process. It really, what it does is it detaches you from that one time a year ability to do it, where you have to make your application by September 30th to get into the following year to do the comp plan amendment. If you're staying in the same column and you're just going down in higher density or something of that sort, there's still public notice required. There's still notice to property owners within 300 feet. So there's still a very transparent process. It's just less kind of segmented with
Okay.
the comp plan amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to keep rolling. Okay, so this diagram looks like some kind of weird thing from a sophomore biology class. So I'm sure we spent a lot of money for a consultant to do this for us. All these notes over here are in the goals and policies in our comprehensive plan. So deleting this in its entirety, I think I'm just planning to delete it. So unless any of you feel really attached to this, I'm going to go ahead and suggest we get rid of this diagram. All right, and then with that, I'm going to turn over to Tanya for economic development, because I think you guys have listened to me plenty. But I'm not going anywhere if you have questions later.
Nothing's on your thing, right?
You just go down arrow, get you to the next slide.
Okay. Good evening, Chair Dovey, Committee Member Tran. I'm not sure if Committee Member Dovey is, or Committee Member Walsh is still on the phone. Also, Council President Kochmar and other council members. Tanya Carter, your Economic Development Director. Tonight, we are going, I believe, for the first time that council has heard anything from economic development on the chapter. And so what we were asked to do is just provide a really high-level summary of the economic development chapter. And essentially, this is a really great opportunity because we haven't had a chance to present what the comprehensive direction and strategy is for economic development. We will just present these 6 areas that you see on your screen. And what essentially these 6 areas represent is a simplification of the comprehensive plan chapter that is currently has been adopted, and we are simplifying it to align with the International Economic Development Council and the way that our kind of governing body for economic development has structured economic development. So there are 6 categories, and I'll just explain at a high level what each one of these categories means for economic development in Federal Way. It's conceptual and it's, again, very general, and as we go throughout the year, we will talk in more detail about strategies and implementation, which, as you know, on the comprehensive plan is fairly high level because it's meant to spread out over a relatively long period of time. So I'm not going to read the 6 categories. I think everyone can get a general idea of them, and I will just kind of go through and discuss each one of them as it relates to the chapter. Economic development, essentially, just for a definition for level setting, is the creation of wealth in a way that the community benefits are realized. And so the best way to achieve this is through a coordinated city strategy to support and positively influence the direction of private sector investment towards opportunities that benefit the private sector while leading to sustained economic growth. So the sustained economic growth ideally provides a living wage for local labor force. It also provides profitable business opportunities for employers and tax revenues for the city to maintain an infrastructure to support this continued growth. And since the private sector investment is really the only economic growth engine, public initiatives have to support the growth and encourage investments where the community feels that they're needed. So I will progress to one of my favorite topics, business retention and expansion. And for the remainder of this presentation, and in general, BRE is what we use as the acronym for business retention and expansion. And essentially, this segment of the economic development chapter, as well as the economic development overall strategy, is really the backbone for economic development in Federal Way. And what the position is that businesses that have chosen Federal Way as their home is really where a large part of our investment is going to center. And BRE strategies really come down to 2 kind of approaches. The first is a direct in-person outreach, and the second is annual surveys. And so we did last year conduct an annual survey, as I think most of you know, and we did conduct a lot of direct and in-person outreach. And really, these connections are able to, the goal of these connections is to identify issues and enable development of support programs and increase opportunities. And the main goal there is to help existing businesses expand and also to identify businesses that might be at risk to make sure that they don't close or relocate, but to make sure that they really stay here in the city. So moving on. This is a term that Keith and I have had some discussion on. Economic gardening is actually a term that has kind of been popularized the last few years in economic development. And really, it's the way that we're positioning it is a branch of retention, business retention and expansion, so BRE. And really what it boils down to is it focuses on growing and nurturing startups and small local businesses. So I generally just use the term entrepreneurial development. So, startups, things of that nature. And the approach there is to grow the economy from within. So to really seek out entrepreneurs, business people, folks that want to start out their own business and nurture those types of businesses here in the city. And really what the idea there is that those companies, those folks will ideally live in the city, and they'll also create wealth in the city. And wealth, of course, then can be translated into more jobs, more revenues, and a really nice, vibrant local business sector. And I think that kind of ties in a little bit to what we were talking about before on the TC3 program and the retail opportunities there. So some of the things that we will build into this economic gardening portion of the chapter are really providing access to tools, knowledge, and experience that entrepreneurs will need to go from ideation into a sustainable business. And as we have heard at the FedErac a few weeks ago, the SBDC, of course, is a great example of one of those types of tools that will be provided to those types of entrepreneurs. And again, alluding back to TC3 and the commercial affordability, which is something that our businesses, when they were surveyed, did express is one of their top 3 concerns that's top of mind for them. So the next part of the chapter is discussing workforce development. And I think that here at Land Use and other committees, we've talked a lot about growth targets for both housing and employment. So Federal Way has a goal and has been tasked with job growth of over 14,000 jobs in the next cycle. And so a key strategy to accomplishing that, of course, is workforce development. And workforce development essentially is the process of identifying and addressing the needs of local employers. So really looking at workforce development from the employer side. What are the things that employers need in order to improve productivity as well as competitiveness? And so operationally, what that really looks like in the future is that it involves economic development assessing the gaps in the workforce, and then addressing them through the creation of various workforce, employee programs and initiatives. And essentially by investing in workforce development, that allows us to really support attracting top talent, as well as employee retention, so making improvements in employee retention and increasing profitability and productivity of the businesses here. Moving along to business attraction. This is also something that we've been discussing a lot lately. What the main goal of business attraction is really identifying and matching companies to the needs of a community and also the assets that a community possesses. So that's something that's really important is identifying, not something that might be aspirational, but identifying what's existing in the community, what can be built on in the community, and what matches those needs of the community. And so essentially, one of the things that there is a lot of discussion about, especially in Federal Way, is retail attraction. And retail attraction is definitely a really important component of business attraction. But it's not the only component of business attraction. And one of the things that economic development really will be focusing on is to essentially focus on business sectors and building an economic base. And so an economic base is what's really important for the city to grow and create stability. And, as mentioned, it's not that we will put retail attraction aside, but really what we will be focusing on is what's our economic base here in Federal Way? How can we diversify it, create more stability, and help support its growth? And we have 2 more sections. Does anyone have any questions, or do you want to wait till the end for questions? Councilmember Honda.
Honda?
Thank you. On the backbone of economic development, business retention and expansion, if you find out a business is leaving, they have closing signs, sales up, or whatever, do you go, or someone in your department goes to that business to try to find out why they're leaving?
Absolutely, yes. There's been several businesses that have been in that process, and we've had discussions with them. So, there's 100 different reasons why businesses move. Some businesses move because of consolidation. So for example, there was consolidation with DaVita, there's consolidation with Smith Brothers, so that's one of the reasons. Other reasons are that, there are branches of those businesses. So there was, I believe it was Marlene's, not Marlene's, can't remember the name of the clothing store that was next to Trader Joe's. But-
Maurice's.
Yes, Maurice's. They had a consolidation, so, that was a corporate decision. So there are 100 different reasons, but absolutely we go as soon as we hear about it. So, we'll hear about it from council, which is very, proactive from council to let us know, or from the business themselves. And a lot of times at that point, there's not really much that we can do to help, but it's certainly good to understand why, so that in the future we can be much more proactive if there seems to be a pattern or trend. But, as you know, there are many national chains that we have less control over influencing them, and it's kind of a corporate decision.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions so far? I'll just finish out the two other portions. So the next, I think, that we have, we've talked a lot about placemaking, and essentially, placemaking and sister city coordination goes a little bit hand in hand. Really, what I think we have talked a little bit about this past year is that workforce essentially now has become so mobile with the knowledge sector and the technology sector jobs. Essentially, people are moving anywhere, remotely or, far away from companies that they may have had to work, at the location in the past. Now there is a lot more movement, obviously since COVID, but the top three reasons really why workforce is moving is, number one is family, number two is just a new adventure. So there's a lot more mobility than there was even 30, 40, 50 years ago. Or there are a lot of folks now in the workforce that are moving because they have certain special interests, and I think we've seen that a lot in the Pacific Northwest with our outdoor environment. A lot of folks are moving to this environment because they are choosing to live in a place where they have access to the activities that they really enjoy. And so one of the things that's very important for the city to attract talent or attract workforce is to really make sure that we have a great place to live. And so that's something, as again, we discussed earlier with TC3, public spaces, multiple housing opportunities, recreation, entertainment, and of course, arts and culture. And that's where our sister city relationships really do nicely dovetail into that, because we do have 3 sister city relationships with Rivne in Ukraine, with Hachinohe in Japan, and of course with Donghae in Korea. We have a really great opportunity with these cities who have a rich and culturally diverse history, as well as us having large communities here in our city, to really have some exchanges and to make a lot of cultural developments by building and fostering those relationships. And lastly is tourism. So essentially with tourism, one of the things that was identified is that, in general in Washington State, there's about $60 million a day that are spent in tourism dollars. So when tourists are coming to Washington State, they spend money on everything from retail to hotels to excursions, to buying souvenirs. And so one of the things that we've identified in Federal Way is that we actually have a very large, and it's the largest of our 3 large sectors, business traveler. So commercial or business traveler is really what the majority of our tourism is. And so there's multiple different kinds of tourism, everything from drive tourism to regional tourism to, church tourism to cultural tourism. We happen to be very heavy, over 40% in business tourism. And so really what the goal there is most business travelers are traveling Monday through Thursday. So they're already here, they're already a captive audience. And so what our goal is essentially to extend their stay. So what that's called is really improving and augmenting the visitor experience. And so that's really the main focus that we'll have, for the next few years, is building that visitor experience. And then ideally, what you do after, some trial and error and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and you activate that visitor experience, then you can start to really dig into demand drivers. And demand drivers can be something, for example, like a Wild Waves. I think that there's not really much chance that we'll get a Disney World or, a Universal Studios here. But over the years, as we develop visitor experience, that starts to create a lot more energy around certain sectors or certain areas that we can then delve into, what might be something bigger to attract to Federal Way that could be an actual demand driver, which would essentially mean it's not a captive audience that's here that just wants another day or another experience. It's someone who's booking their holiday to come here because of something that we do provide here. So that is pretty much a high-level summary. I think it's a great opportunity just to go over the kind of high-level strategy for economic development and how we're simplifying the chapter to really align and streamline what the strategies would be in the future. And I think that is it. Are there any other questions? No blue lights. Great. Thank you, Chair. I am finished.
There's one.
Oh, sorry. Councilwoman Assefa Dawson.
Yeah, I was just looking at my notes, so
Sure.
to see if they were worth. But with economic base that you talked about, would that be what we identified as the healthcare or health segment? And
Correct. Yeah, great question. Healthcare continuum. And the reason why we chose the word continuum is because we really do have a very strong backbone of healthcare in the city. And in order to diversify that backbone, there are a number of different ways, that we can do that. And essentially what we want to do is focus on what are the suppliers that this healthcare industry that we have here, and I think we have over 5,000, employees here, in the healthcare industry. What are the suppliers that are needed? What are the workforce needs that they have? So for example, in healthcare, that would be anything from a doctor to a radiologist to some kind of a technician. What are the other, surrounding auxiliary industries? So anything from medical devices to, in-home, aging in home, aging in place. There are early childhood. There are so many different branches that can support the backbone that we have here. And so really providing a continuum not only allows for that economic base to grow, but it also is really important to understand that workforce here for healthcare, in all the conversations that we've had with the healthcare industry, we have one of the strongest workforce bases for healthcare, meaning that specifically we, according to our healthcare providers, have the easiest time to hire and maintain workforce in that industry. So essentially what we don't want to do is we don't want to lose that base. If someone decides to switch jobs, we don't want them to go somewhere else. We want them to stay within the industry and stay within Federal Way. And so that's also what's really important, is to focus on that, maintaining what we've got here and to build that instead of trying to create something new. That is an extremely heavy lift, and any amount of money, let's say a big amount of money, we can certainly do that, but we're trying to make the best with our resources and build our economy from the bottom up.
Okay, and then we had talked about Tech Hub a while ago, and it did come up a couple of weeks or last week. Where are we on that, or what does it, there's a shift, I think?
Great question. And we were asked to provide more in-depth information tomorrow at the special meeting at I believe it's 4:30 or 5 o'clock. So we can definitely go into more detail on that if that is okay with the committee and with Councilmember Assefa Dawson. Great. Okay, any other questions? Great, thank you.
I just want to make sure that we know that tomorrow it's 5 o'clock for the meeting, special meeting. Thank you, though.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present a high-level overview of the Community Services chapter. So this will be a new chapter addition for the comprehensive plan. I will start with just a quick slide. What this does is it gives that really quick snapshot of race and ethnicity, showing that the diversity in the city is increasing. While we've had other demographic shifts, this is one. You'll see the change from 1990 through 2020 using that census data. Additionally, other shifts have occurred with country of origin, languages spoken, and more. The city benefits from a community that is diverse in cultures, race, ethnicity, national origin, language, age, religion, and many other factors. We are also planning for ways that we can engage and serve the entire community. So within the Community Services chapter, we'll have two primary components, that being Diversity, Equity, Access, and Inclusion, or DEAI, and then our social services. So within the Diversity, Equity, Access, and Inclusion, I just want to kind of bring us back to the second comprehensive plan quarterly update that happened in June of 2022, where we talked about the approach, or other staff did rather, the approach that would be happening with DEAI and its integration into the comprehensive plan. At that meeting, it was presented that there was what was called an option 2, and it was the integration throughout the plan rather than having a solitary chapter or some other mechanism. This went through the Diversity Commission, the ad hoc committee for the comprehensive plan, and then to LUTC at that June meeting. So within that proposal, this chapter will include DEAI integrated into our community services. You'll see a related goal and policy. The Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Analyst is within Community Development and Community Services. That position actually serves the full city, both internally, providing resources and consultation, as well as some external-facing services. Additionally, the DEAI work includes both compliance-based work. When we talk about compliance-based work, we're looking at the Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Additionally, within the comprehensive plan, there is compliance that's required for certification, and that requires certain elements throughout the plan to include DEAI. And then we have our social services grant making. We have conducted a needs assessment. This is comparable to what we've done in the past. Usually we do this on a 5-year cadence. This one was 4 years, just to make the time for this comprehensive plan addition. We did have some briefings in the fall with some council members who engaged with community services staff just in terms of the needs that we were seeing. I'll give not a lot of information on that. It's a 51-page document, a lot of quantitative data. We had different focus groups and interviews that also fed into that plan. So our social services community needs assessment covered a wide array of services: demographics, income, aging and disabilities, climate resiliency, digital equity, education, health, housing, youth services, and more. Within that, the general findings included that we continue to see service gaps in all areas. That means that our residents, when they are seeking services, aren't always able to find those services in a timely manner. And that includes both locally and regionally. That's something that we want to continue to address as we can. What we saw is that healthcare, including behavioral health, opioid use, housing stability and homelessness, economic stability, all continue to be needs. And then there were population-based needs around our older adults and also youth services. Just for a high-level overview of the DEAI goal and policies, we'll be integrating DEAI for increased accessibility and culturally relevant services. The policies that kind of come out of that are going to be focused on relationship building, community outreach and engagement, physical and digital accessibility and meaningful language access, accessible responsive services, internal resources, again, that consultation with other departments, how we assist staff in accessing language services when they need translation or interpretation, some tools that might help in outreach, how we might do targeted outreach, tying into the next bullet, the use of quantitative and qualitative data. One thing that we see is that if we're doing broad-based outreach, it's a little bit easier. If we're looking at a project that has a narrower focus or a benefit in a certain neighborhood, we need quicker access to data around, like, what languages do we have to translate to if it's compliance-based? Who's living in that neighborhood? Some of that we learn over time. You heard Kevin, a colleague from Public Works, talk about the language translation that they do in SWIM, and they actually do a great job in using both a compliance-based as well as kind of that good practice in saying, like, we have a lot of people coming to our events who are speaking a language that isn't required by Title VI, that they're coming and we're not able to communicate. We're going to have these translated resources, and we would like to see that be a little bit easier for other staff within the city to do as well. And then our social services goal, in terms of our priorities for social services that reduce poverty and increase resiliency, self-reliance, and well-being. Basic needs are one of the highest. Basic needs includes housing, health, and hunger. That is one of the, actually all three of our primary priorities are very similar to the current council-adopted strategies, and these were adopted back in 2019. The second theme, individual and community safety. Third, poverty reduction, employment and education type programs. And adaptive response, as you know, we want to be able to be nimble as a city. If something is emerging or a critical need comes up, we still want to be able to address that need in the community. And then the final policy would be around addressing unmet needs and opportunities for consistent services, looking at things like space and other barriers that might exist. And then a grant making goal, largely this is going to be about our grant administration, how we use ethical stewardship of those funds, both local, regional, federal dollars that we have access to. Whether or not they come through the city, it's also helping our community access those dollars if we're not directly connected. Supporting the coordination of new and existing programs and funding is that last bullet that you'll see, and then how we participate in planning processes both locally and regionally. And with that, I think all three of us are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Councilmember Honda?
Oh, thank you. Can you go back to your first slide, please? And thank you for being here. It's always good to see you. The figure 2 from 1990 to 2020, are you seeing this throughout South King County?
I have not tracked throughout all of South King County or other jurisdictions. We do see increased diversity, whether or not we're, above above the change that they're seeing, I can't speak to. I think Cheney actually had talked about the comparison to King County, and within King County, I believe we do exceed the percentages that they do, the percentage of change.
So with this change, do we have more needs social service-wise?
Not explicitly based on race and ethnicity, although we do see disproportionate rates of poverty among people of color, so our BIPOC community, and that goes back to a lot of historical policies you can look at, and just different opportunities that have not always been afforded to all people.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question on this graph here. Why do we now only have 3 percentages of population by their ethnicity instead of, on the other side, we have a whole bunch? I mean, you have white, Hispanic, black, indigenous, color, all put. Why do we only have 3 instead of what the actual breakdown is?
For ethnicity, so for ethnicity, you're largely with census data looking at the Hispanic of any race, and then that's just to show your two.
It's kind of,
bigger
isn't it kind of misleading? I mean, I get it. I mean, shouldn't it be a little broader, like you did on the other side? I don't know. I've never seen it where they just break it down into 3 different groups.
Yeah, often with ethnicity, we will. Sometimes you might also see where you'd have all the race and ethnicity, that can have some duplication, so your ethnicity is then duplicated, that there are different ways of presenting that data. I appreciate the comment.
Nowhere in here, it wasn't our population base at one time, almost 13% from Korea or Korean ancestry?
Yes, so this particular, I can't answer that
I just
particular
wondered
item,
where
but yeah.
that shows, because they're a very large population of federal.
And it wouldn't with census data. You'll see Asian as the population. That does include a number of countries, and and starting at 7% in 1990, 12% in 2014 in
It's a growing,
2010.
yeah, okay. It just seems kind of weird to me, the way.
One is race and the other one's ethnicity. So they're 2 different things they're measuring.
Thank you. Councilmember McDaniel?
Yeah, I'm gonna go on a comment there. Is it possible to get this broken out more, or is it just how the statistics are provided to you?
This is through the census. I am not sure how, we can take a look at the census data if you want to see ethnicity by race. Oftentimes, this is probably a bigger conversation, but we can talk about ethnicity and what happens with census data when someone is Hispanic or Latino. Often selecting a race, it's, they're kind of forced into that. So you might see some other race or multiracial as a more common response. But we can talk about the significance of ethnicity and how that happens, and we can provide additional data if it's available.
Is this data broken this way for grant purposes or anything like that, or is just the way that was just, okay. I was just curious, like he said, I don't see the groups that I know, and I know they fall into a category there, but.
And that is the difference between the race and ethnicity. So it is common to separate out those two.
Okay, and then the second question I had real quick was, this was not originally part, so how was this designed beforehand for community services? Were you guys a subcategory? You didn't have your own chapter, or how was it done in the previous year? I thought you said this is being added this year.
Yes, it is one of the new chapters for this comprehensive plan. So we were not reflected in the prior comprehensive plan.
Is that a city choice, or is that state requirement?
That was council choice in 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Honda?
Oh, thank you. Do you have and I don't need it tonight, but a breakout of how many seniors, a percentage of seniors? When I looked at the census data the other day at the senior retreat, I think it said 14.5% of our population is over 65, and how that impacts the city?
Yes, actually I do have some of that. I can talk about projection. So we only get the projection for King County, that if we kind of take that to the same rate of change to Federal Way, what we would see is, let's see, so actually as of right now, about 13.5% of the Federal Way population is age 65 or older. We would expect to see that it could be as much as 18% by 2030, based on the King County projections. And what we anticipate is just looking at a lot more of our healthcare needs, transportation. We talk about the social, emotional, fixed incomes, so we're talking housing needs for seniors, aging in place. When we look at our housing repair programs, we have both minor home repair and then the major home repair, not major, but
Right.
Slightly larger. And a lot of those have historically, a lot of the repairs that we see come in are historically tied to aging in place, whether it's accessibility or other types of adaptations to the home.
For your housing repair program, there was a nice comment on social media today about the city of Federal Way. And a woman had some housing repair work done by Habitat for Humanity and the city, and how grateful she was, and that others should use the program. So it was very nice to see something positive on social media. So
Well,
thought you
that's
might
good to
want to
hear.
know that. Anyway,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Oh, excuse me, Council.
Thank you. So, hi. I'm glad to see you again, too. It's always nice to see you. I do remember the census, and I do remember that it was broken out differently than this. And so I believe that, if I remember right, Hispanics were 18%, and that at that point, I thought Caucasian was 51%, but it could be lower. Asian were 12%. Black, I thought was 14%. I'd have to count up my percentages there. I'm not sure if I've got that right. I guess I'm more concerned, really, with what's happening with the Hispanic group, because I know that we have immigrants coming in, living in Tukwila, Renton. I'm wondering if, and I do know that there are Hispanics, that group is growing here, but I'm wondering, how these percentages are going to change and whether we've had anybody talking to us about the immigrants coming across the border. I mean, I haven't seen that here personally.
And I think in the, I can give you a quick update that it is something that we're engaging with. There's a new intergovernmental task force that kind of talks about this, Tukwila being one of the locations that has had a lot of focus with Riverton and the changes that are happening with that housing. Kind of all cities just figuring out what would preparation look like if something, if we did have an increase in asylum seekers within the city, like, how do you ensure that they have services? King County is being pretty active in that emergency management as well. So Kevin Pelly within the city is connected to King County. So we are looking at that and making sure that, we would be prepared to have some level of response if we see a significant increase. But we do have ongoing conversations. I mean, the school district will also say that one of the largest growing languages that they see is, I believe it's Dari. They might have a second Middle Eastern language as well. So it's a shift in that demographic at our local school district. We hear that from partners in the community, a faith-based community that's working with a lot of people on the ground and seeing similar shifts. So we know that that is happening. It's just not necessarily to the same level as certain other communities.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you.
So I guess,
I think we're done.
I think we're done. We're
If
very,
you have any additional questions, happy to do that, but otherwise, it was just an update. I think if you guys have any thoughts on any of those chapters, feel free to send them our way.
we will.
Thank you all so much for your time this evening.
So now we'll move to the next information only, Public Works Strategic Plan. Are you gonna run that, or?
Yeah, so if you're okay, I will start from here while Stacy's
Okay.
pulling up the presentation instead of both of us standing in front of the same microphone. So as a little bit of background for council, Public Works, about 2.5 years ago, implemented a Next Up Leadership series, which is an in-house, I think we've briefed council on this before, but it's an in-house training program and leadership development program that Desiree and myself run. And it was really a request coming out of staff that was focused on developing our staff for the long run and creating leadership opportunities. So as part of that, we go over a bunch of both hard skills about government relations and government and how, charters work and code cities and everything else, as well as soft skills, which are, personal development. So one of the topics that we covered is departmental strategic plans, which is not something the Public Works Department has ever had in the history of the city, but something that, had been on our kind of tickler list to work out eventually, and we just hadn't gotten there. So we brought it up as part of that training, and then dovetailed into that, and concurrently, we've also, Public Works encompasses a broad range of professionals. We have engineers in City Hall, we have education and outreach staff, you've heard from some of them tonight. We also have people that are out in the field, working day in and day out, you heard from one of them tonight too. It covers a broad range of topics, and one of the requests we constantly get is how do we concisely explain interdepartmentally to, from Division 1 to Division 2, especially for new hires, everything that we're responsible for and everything that we do. So we kind of took those two topics together, and Stacy was kind enough to step forward and say, hey, I want a little bit of a stretch project. And we tasked some internal staff, this was all done in-house. We didn't use consultants to do any of this work. But it was in-house to actually figure out, to take the council goals, the mayor's goals that are established, that are, on the website, take them, figure out how we apply them into Public Works on a day-to-day basis, and kind of get our heads out of the weeds of, picking up litter, mowing the grass, designing that next engineering project, and look at the long range. So what you're going to see tonight is the result of the work that Stacy led and the strategic plan that is in final form at this point, and it's about to be made live on the website. So with that, I'm actually going to let Stacy dig into the plan itself.
Thank you, EJ. Good evening, council members. So as EJ said, this plan was based off of the city's vision and goals. So we had internally our strategic planning committee that was each person from every division. And so we did a deep dive into our strengths and our weaknesses. We collected input from all of our staff, and we developed this strategic plan. So here we have our strategic plan framework. So on the left-hand side, we have our values. On the right-hand side, we have our strategic themes. And in the middle, we have our vision and our mission statement. So the vision statement says, we enhance and maintain the quality of life, promote economic growth and sustainability, while increasing accessibility, safety, and mobility for all. Our mission statement is providing the highest quality of modern infrastructure and services. Being responsible stewards of our environment, we create a safe community for all who live, work, and play in Federal Way. Here we have the definitions for our values and our strategic themes. So we have the category, but we wanted to elaborate on what these mean to the department. So our values define the fundamental behaviors that guide our actions to achieve our vision and mission, while building trust throughout our organization and community. The strategic themes, they are guiding pillars of success. They bridge the gap between our division's objectives and our vision. So within this document, we also have our division plans. And those are made up of our division descriptions, the objectives for the next 5 years, our division strategies, and ways to mitigate those pitfalls. So here's an example of one of our divisions. On the left-hand side, you can see that it's the environmental services, has a picture and the description, and then on the right-hand side, we have our objectives that the division came up with themselves. And so we have the icons on the bottom, and those are related to our themes. The next we have a few pictures for each division, and they have our facts that are associated with them. And our next steps, we want to expand on division plan objectives, so go into more detail about those. We also want to create annual progress reports starting in 2025, and we plan to update the entire plan every 5 years. Any questions?
I don't see any, but it looks like you've done a very extensive update. It looks good.
Yeah, and the one thing I will add is that we are getting the final copies printed, so we will have them to Amy, I think, tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning.
So they will be, copies of the full document will be made available to council in advance of the council meeting tomorrow night for your perusal.
Great. Thank you very much for your hard work and your staff putting this together.
Thank you.
Okay, one of our favorite pieces of our land use meeting is progress update on Sound Transit bridges. No.
Good evening. All right, so good evening. Kent Smith with the Public Works Department, here to update on the sound transit activities in the city. So for everything north of 317th, for Federal Link Extension. Landscaping, systems, duct bank, ballast installation, some fire standpipe installation, fencing installation along the corridor. They're starting to wrap up quite a bit of areas, especially the further north you go. Utility and drainage work is occurring along Military Road near South 304th Street. This is in preparation for some of the final frontage and roadway work. Their signal house and traction power substations are continuing with duct bank, conduit installation, and electrical connections, and the CMU wall installation, so those are getting a little closer. For the city center, one-way traffic again on northbound 23rd Avenue South to install the final concrete road panels. And I got an image that'll give us a little bit of detail of it next, but similarly, pedestrian connections on South 320th, and then as well, finishing up some more roundabout panels on near South 317th Street. Roadway work for the internal roads is still happening, mostly with some stormwater work and roadway prep. Construction of the new bus loop ongoing. They poured quite a few concrete panels, and they've done some bus shelter installation. There's also water installation and additional utility work on South 317th Street. And then they're pouring, or getting ready to pour some panels on the center portion of South 317th. Station work ongoing with elevator and escalator work, ceiling panel installation, flooring installation, and communication work. And then we've got final grading and prep for the bus layover lot has started, as well as some internal work for the garage extension, and then the end-of-line facility, elevator, and communication work. So here's a rundown of basically an aerial image that we get every now and then for the downtown area. This middle section that's got the curb is the new bus loop, and the station is kind of in this sort of middle of the page, with where you can see some of the concrete panels are in for the bus loop, and they're getting closer with some of the internal roadways. I don't have anything significant for the operations and maintenance facility south. We're still expecting the final EIS publication mid-2024, and then similarly for Tacoma Dome Link Extension, expecting their DEIS publication mid-2024. And then I'll answer any questions.
Councilmember Honda?
Thank you. Do we have any updates on public art?
The only update I have is that they had to push back installation of the artwork along the side of the garage based on some traffic impacts. They needed to have a certain streets closed, and they didn't want to have double streets closed at the same time. So at some point, they'll start installing those pieces. I think they're ready. They need to get the time frame correct so that they don't have multiple streets closed at the same time.
What about the lamp?
Nothing more on the lamp. I haven't seen any updated imagery yet.
How is Belmore Park, their acquisition of property going?
I haven't heard much. I know they got the authorization to begin early acquisition, but I don't know if they've actually offered to any of the property owners yet.
Okay. And then my last question is just kind of random, but I was thinking about the next earthquake the other day in our bridges. And now we have a new bridge downtown, which is the light rail bridge. Are we working with Sound Transit on our emergency preparation in case that earthquake ever does happen? Do we have a relationship as to who would inspect the rail and the bridge and all of their infrastructure that they have?
I believe it's all Sound Transit's responsibility. It's all their infrastructure, as they're their own public agency. They handle how that would happen. I don't know if I have any more.
Okay. I was just curious as to how that interacts with what we're doing here at the city. Thank you.
Well, I see no more questions, so I think we can actually see if anybody has anything else they'd like to bring up. Okay, our next meeting is going to be April 1, and it's not, we're not going to have an April Fool's party. We're actually going to have stuff to do, and so we will now adjourn.
Thank you.